What if an ancient clay tablet, written thousands of years before modern civilization, contained a story so strange that even artificial intelligence struggled to categorize it? A record describing kings who ruled for impossible lengths of time, cities that existed before legendary floods, and beings called gods who were presented not as distant myths, but as figures connected to the origins of human civilization. When researchers asked Grok AI to examine the mystery surrounding the Sumerian gods and the ancient records that describe them, the response opened a much deeper question. Were these stories simply mythology created by ancient priests, or were they preserving memories of something that happened long ago? The reason this mystery continues to attract attention is not because people are unfamiliar with ancient gods. Almost every civilization had stories about powerful beings from the heavens. The Egyptians had their divine rulers, the Greeks had their Olympian gods, and the Norse had their powerful figures who shaped the world. But the Sumerians were different because they left behind some of humanity's earliest written records. Their clay tablets do not come from a modern imagination. They come from one of the first civilizations known to have developed a system of writing. Among the most fascinating discoveries connected to this civilization is the Sumerian king list, an ancient document that records a succession of rulers stretching back into a mysterious period before a great flood. The text describes kingship as something that came from heaven and lists rulers with reigns that seem impossible by modern standards. The question that has fascinated historians for generations is simple but difficult. Why would ancient scribes write such precise details about rulers who appear almost supernatural? The story begins with a remarkable artifact known as the Weld Blundell prism. This small, four-sided clay object was discovered in the early 20th century in modern-day Iraq and eventually became one of the most important sources for studying Sumerian history. Covered in cuneiform writing, the prism contains a version of the Sumerian king list, a document that combines mythology, royal tradition, and historical memory. The opening lines describe a time when kingship descended from heaven and the first ruler was placed in the city of Eridu. According to the text, this early king ruled for thousands of years. To modern readers, these numbers sound impossible. But the mystery is not only about the length of the reigns, it is about the way the information is presented. The Sumerians did not randomly create numbers. They used a highly organized mathematical system based around 60. This same system influenced measurements that are still familiar today, such as 60 minutes in an hour, and the division of a circle into degrees. The reign lengths found in the king list follow patterns connected to this numerical system. For example, the earliest rulers are assigned enormous periods of rule, but those numbers repeatedly fit within the mathematical traditions of ancient Mesopotamia. This raises an interesting question. If these were simply fictional stories, why did the writers maintain such a consistent numerical structure? Some researchers believe the answer lies in the purpose of the document. The Sumerian king list may not have been created as a modern history book. Instead, it may have served a political purpose. Ancient rulers often wanted to show that their authority was connected to the divine by creating a chain of kings stretching back to heavenly origins. Later dynasties could present themselves as part of a sacred tradition. This interpretation explains why gods and kings appear together in the same record. The document may have been designed to show that legitimate rule came from a higher power. In this view, the ancient gods were symbols of authority rather than physical beings who ruled on earth. However, the mystery becomes more complicated because many locations mentioned in the king list were real places. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of ancient settlements connected to these names. This creates an unusual situation. A document that contains impossible reigns also contains real geography. It mixes legendary elements with details that connect to actual archaeological evidence. That combination is what makes the Sumerian king list so difficult to place into a single category. Modern technology has added another layer to this investigation. Artificial intelligence is now being used by researchers to analyze ancient texts, compare different copies, and identify patterns that would take humans much longer to discover. AI does not believe in ancient gods, and it does not reject them either. It simply examines information, looking for relationships between words, numbers, and historical records. If AI studies the Sumerian king list, it can identify repeated structures, compare different versions of the text, and highlight unusual patterns. But it cannot answer the biggest question by itself. It cannot determine whether the ancient writers were recording history, mythology, astronomy, or religious beliefs. One of the most interesting figures connected to this debate is Gilgamesh. In the Sumerian king list, Gilgamesh appears as a ruler of Uruk after the flood. For centuries, many people considered him purely legendary because of the famous Epic of Gilgamesh, where he is portrayed as a hero searching for immortality. But archaeological discoveries changed the discussion. Inscriptions connected to Gilgamesh suggest that he may have been based on a real historical ruler whose story became larger over time. This does not mean every detail of the epic happened exactly as described, but it shows that ancient legends sometimes preserve memories of real people. This discovery creates an important question. If one legendary king may have been connected to history, could other figures from ancient traditions also contain pieces of forgotten historical memory? The integration of modern artificial intelligence into the study of Sumerian records highlights patterns that ancient scribes might have encoded intentionally or unconsciously. When examining the king list through computational lenses, algorithms detect recurring numerical motifs tied to base 60 mathematics, such as reigns divisible by high powers of 60 that mirror astronomical cycles observed in Mesopotamian star charts. This suggests the text could blend historical kernels with symbolic chronology used to legitimize dynastic claims while preserving cultural memory of cataclysmic events, like floods, that align with geological evidence from the region around 2900 BCE. Further analysis reveals cross-cultural parallels extending beyond Enoch, including Vedic yugas with extended timescales and Egyptian pharaoh lists boasting divine lineages, indicating a shared human impulse to frame origins through exaggerated yet structured narratives. AI processing of cuneiform variants uncovers subtle discrepancies in king names and durations across tablets, pointing to evolving oral traditions formalized in clay, where gods like Anu, Enlil, and Inanna function as archetypes for natural forces, societal order, and technological innovations, such as irrigation systems that enabled early urbanism. Rather than dismissing these as pure fiction, the data implies layers of euhemerism, where real leaders or natural phenomena were deified over generations, creating a continuum from pre-flood antediluvian rulers to post-flood historical figures verifiable through excavations at sites like Uruk. This fusion challenges binary classifications of myth versus history, urging deeper interdisciplinary approaches that combine linguistics, archaeology, and data science to decode whether these tablets encode lost knowledge of environmental shifts, migrations, or even early astronomical observations that influence subsequent civilizations. Ultimately, such inquiries underscore humanity's enduring quest to bridge the divine and the mundane through enduring artifacts that outlast their creators. The Sumerian king list creates an unusual timeline. It begins with rulers connected to divine origins, moves through legendary figures, and eventually reaches kings who have stronger archaeological support. The transition is gradual, rather than clearly divided. There is no statement in the text saying, "This part is mythology and this part is history." The ancient scribes presented everything as one continuous tradition. That does not prove that every ruler existed exactly as described, but it shows how ancient people understood their own past. Another fascinating connection appears when comparing Sumerian traditions with other ancient stories. One example involves En-men-dur-ana, a mysterious Sumerian king associated with heavenly knowledge. He is described as a figure connected with divine wisdom and the secrets of the gods. Some researchers have noticed similarities between this figure and Enoch from biblical traditions, who is also described as a person connected with heavenly knowledge and a special relationship with the divine. Both appear in the 7th position of their respective lists, and both are associated with access to knowledge beyond ordinary humans. These similarities do not prove that the stories describe the same person. They may represent shared themes that appeared in different cultures. Ancient civilizations often developed similar ideas about floods, divine wisdom, creation, and the relationship between heaven and earth. So what happens when Grok AI is asked whether the Sumerian gods were real? The answer is not a simple yes or no. The evidence shows that the Sumerians truly existed. Their cities existed, their writings existed, their mathematical systems existed. Their stories influenced later civilizations. But whether the gods described in these texts were literal beings, symbolic figures, or representations of ancient beliefs remains a question that cannot be proven by the available evidence. What AI reveals is not proof of ancient gods walking among humans. Instead, it reveals something perhaps even more fascinating: the incredible complexity of human memory. Thousands of years ago, people recorded their understanding of kings, gods, disasters, and the origins of civilization. They left behind clues that modern technology is only beginning to analyze. The Sumerian tablets do not give us an easy answer. They give us a mystery that has survived for thousands of years. They show us a civilization trying to explain where humanity came from, who had the right to rule, and whether the boundary between gods and humans was ever as clear as we believe today. And after thousands of years, one question remains unanswered. Were the Sumerians writing myths about gods, or were they preserving memories of something humanity has not yet fully understood?